A brand new 2025 release of Red Dead Redemption gives all the latest console platforms, most notably Nintendo Switch 2, a string of visual upgrades. The basics are, it's a free upgrade for those that already own the game on PS4, Xbox or the original Switch, allowing PS5, Series X, S and Switch 2 users to access a new improved build. It's a new native app on the home screen. It weighs in at just shy of 10GB, includes HDR support, and of course comes complete with the Undead Nightmare expansion. To be blunt though, the PS4 version already ran well as is on PS5 via backcompat, at a true native 4K resolution, 60 frames per second, with an option for AMD's FSR2 upscaler. So in looking at a dedicated PS5 version, what exactly is left for developer Double 11 to add to the package this time around? Secondly, how does this impact Xbox Series X and S users who until now have relied on backwards compatibility to the 360 version, which only runs at 30 FPS? And most pertinently, we have the Switch 2 edition, which promises to address some of the frame rate and image quality limits of the original 2023 Switch release. How does it compare, and can it hold 60 FPS? Let's find out.
This video is brought to you by Digital Foundry and CyberPower PC. Click on the link below to access Christmas savings on a number of Corsair Infinity gaming PCs, starting with the Infinity C5 pairing a Ryzen 5 8400F with a Radeon 9060 XT and 32GB of RAM. The Infinity C6 ups specs to the Ryzen 7 9800X3D, the fastest CPU for gamers, along with the impressive Radeon RX 9070 XT. The Infinity C7 ramps up the specs still further with the monstrous GeForce RTX 5090 and WD Black SSD. All three offerings ship with a free game. A world-leading PC manufacturer with a 4.7-star Trustpilot rating, CyberPower PC is an official launch partner for PC component brands like Nvidia, AMD and Intel, with over 20 years of custom building experience. A 5-year warranty is offered on all of its desktops, alongside lifetime technical support. Oh, and free UK delivery. But there's more. Enter the CyberPower PC giveaway for a chance to win a Corsair Air 5400 gaming PC, pairing Ryzen 7 9700X with a GeForce RTX 5070 and 32GB of DDR5. Get your entries in by December the 19th. Check the video description below for more details.
Let's kick off with the Switch 2 situation. Being originally developed for vintage Xbox 360 and PS3 hardware, the question really is, to what extent do Red Dead Redemption's visuals scale beyond what we already have? In most cases, the upgrades are obvious in three specific areas: the anti-aliasing method, shadow quality, and finally the level of detail settings. So for context, the original Switch release from 2023 already offered slightly better LODs over the 360 original, plus it ran at 1080p while docked and 720p portable. It was a pretty decent conversion, though let down by some lingering pop-in issues, notably in busier towns or cities, and also poor texture filtering. Image quality also suffered in motion due to its FXAA setting, struggling to treat all the flickering edges on foliage and geometry. And finally, its 30 frames per second target was let down by drops into the 20s. Mostly it did hit 30, but busier shootouts with multiple NPCs, or even zombies in the Undead Nightmare expansion would trigger lurches. Flipping over to Switch 2 then, all of that is improved. Of course, the textures, Rage engine physics, and world design are fundamentally unchanged, but developer Double 11 finds worthwhile ways to refine the package. Firstly then, while docked, Switch 2 uses DLSS to reconstruct a much crisper, higher quality 1440p frame, with reworked minimaps and text elements as well. The actual native resolution is 720p, but the DLSS factor plays a huge role in creating a more temporally stable result than was ever possible on the original Switch. In comparison, grass elements resolve with less flicker, there's a significant reduction in aliasing on buildings ahead, plus you'll notice the outlines of trees on the far horizon are artifact free. So yes, while it's technically rendering each frame at just 720p, DLSS is able to convincingly reconstruct that to 1440p using data from previous frames. The other good news is that 2D assets like the world map get a huge increase in resolution over the original Switches. The same applies to the new PS5 and Series X and S versions, and it's great to see. Of course, Switch 2 boosts a few other visual settings over the original Switch. We're not quite at PC's ultra presets overall, but it is pretty close. To start, we get a much needed bump to 16 times anisotropic filtering, addressing a major limit in the original Switch's blurry presentation of ground textures at tight angles. Next, Switch 2 increases the terrain LOD setting. In this initial horseback route, there's an aggressive switch over to terrain detail, like rock structures on the original Switch. This is helped by running at a higher setting on Switch 2, and while pop-in still lingers on those mountainous inclines ahead, it's far less distracting. At a standstill outside this fort, for example, Switch 2's able to render an entire rock structure beyond the original hardware's range. Likewise, the geometry LOD setting, which affects buildings in Armadillo Town, is improved on Switch 2, even if it's still imperfect. You'll easily spot LOD transitions and flickering textures, which is disappointing to still see 15 years on from its very first release. Otherwise though, much of the world detail is identical between these two Switch machines. One final point to mention is shadow quality. Previously, Switch ran at close to PC's medium shadow softness setting, which kept tree shadows sharp even if they should logically appear diffused given their distance to the ground. Switch 2 improves this by running at the absolute top PC setting, at least while docked. For context, the shadow softness setting on PC ranges between 4 presets: low, medium, high, and a contact hardening soft shadows option. CHSS appears closest to the high setting, but is more advanced in simulating a shadow casting object's proximity to the ground. Hence, using CHSS, a shadow projected to the ground by tall trees will appear diffuse and blurry. But in this following shot, objects closer to the ground, like this building's front porch, will naturally appear sharper. The good news is that Switch 2, and indeed PS5, inherit that CHSS setting from PC. The bad news is the actual shadow resolution underneath that filtering does not match PC's Ultra option. Instead, you'll notice along the bottom edge of this shot aliasing on those shadow edges that puts Switch 2 and PS5 closer to PC's high or medium setting, and these two consoles appear matched in this area. It's a good turnout overall for Switch 2 then, but let's talk about its handheld play. On the portable front, Switch 2 sees a few expected tweaks but nothing radical. DLSS reconstructs a 1080p final frame in this case, this time using a lower 540p base image. It's the very same principle as docked play, but adjusts for the lower GPU and memory clock speeds while in a handheld state. In comparison with still shots taken in portable mode, distant detail holds up exactly to docked play. Every setting in terms of grass and terrain LODs is identical, though there is an exception in shadow quality. While in a handheld state, Switch 2 flips to a worse shadow softening preset, closer to PC's medium setting, producing sharper outlines from trees. In other words, that CHSS setting is gone and is reserved only for docked play. Other than that though, there's very little change between docked and portable play. The final high point for Switch 2 is its performance. Switch 2 not only improves image quality, boosts LOD settings, shadows, but it also doubles the frame rate to 60 FPS. On the whole, it's a success in getting there too, whether docked or portable, and it must be stressed 60 FPS is the constant readout 99% of the time. Now, to nitpick, there are dips into the 50s around Armadillo Bar, and also Blackwater Town while taking on zombie hordes. The Undead Nightmare expansion makes drops more immediately obvious in the first few missions, but they are brief and infrequent enough for it to be an enjoyable 60 FPS ride. Putting performance aside, and as the icing on the cake, there's an extra control option on Switch 2 in the form of mouse controls using either Joy-Con. It works well, but as I've discovered in the likes of Cyberpunk, it's not especially comfortable. Mainly this is because there's still a reliance on the face buttons on that Joy-Con, and tilting it sideways and still accessing those controls does take some getting used to. Moving over to PlayStation 5, the game inevitably has a few other advantages here. It keeps the native 4K resolution of the existing PS4 app, played via backcompat on PS5, and runs at 60 FPS faultlessly as you'd expect. There's not even a blip on record here below 60, which is great. Speaking on resolution, there are possible DRS adjustments just shy of 4K, but typically it's at that top number. Though in comparing the older PS4 app to the new PS5 version, it's also clear that the 4K frame is only part of the equation in assessing image quality. Despite the same pixel count, the PS5 version produces a less flicker-prone, more temporally stable result. Visual noise is also reduced across the ground ahead, best noticed during a walk through Armadillo Town here. It's by no means perfect, and there's still aliasing across power cables overhead, but it's a welcome step up in image stability. In theory, it's possible PS5 is using an improved form of AMD's FSR, potentially making the jump from FSR2 to FSR3. Indeed, the FXAA and FSR2 toggle of the PS4 app is removed outright on the PS5 app, so Double 11 is rightly confident in their new default AA setup. And on that note, the 30 and 60 FPS toggle is gone for a similar reason. Speaking more broadly on settings upgrades, once again, we see shadows taking a vaulting leap over the PS4 app version, which deferred to a very rough, harsh, soft shadow setting. Another big win here is the boost to draw distance. In this train route downhill, trees, grass, buildings, and geometry now render in at a far greater range on PS5. Pop-in is reduced then, and with much improved shadows as well. The result on PS5 next to PC at ultra settings is close, but still falls short in a few areas. Image quality wise, the two are near identical outside of some image treatment discrepancies at 4K, where PC has Nvidia's DLAA engaged in this case. Looking across the horizon during this opening train ride, PS5 gets PC's ultra settings in draw distances for terrain, though PC does still offer a superior foliage and geometry setting here. Note, flipping back and forth, how grass extends further to the distance on PC, while the geometric mesh for the cacti on right is at a higher LOD on PC. Again, shadows are comparable for the most part with that CHSS setting on PS5, though the core shadow resolution is a setting lower. So not quite at PC's best settings, but it is a boost over the original PS4 app. There's little else to add here, so for a more substantial gap, let's pit Switch 2 against PS5 next. The image quality difference is more striking, with PS5, of course, rendering 9 times the number of pixels compared to Switch 2's 720p. And while DLSS does turn around great results given the frame data being fed to it, there are limits to the technology. At range, sub-pixel detail on grass is still a challenge for DLSS to resolve cleanly next to PS5's true 4K image. There's still aliasing on dangling cables, and disocclusion artifacts as NPCs obscure and then reveal scenery. In terms of settings, the two are again identical in most respects, though the grass draw distance on this initial trail to the fort is lower on Switch 2. Really, this should not detract from Switch 2's achievements, given the huge gulf in power draw between the two. As a docked experience, it's a vast upgrade over what we had before on the OG Switch, but for a pure big screen experience, it's worth making these few distinctions in favour of PS5. Next along, we have perhaps the most long overdue upgrade of the bunch on Series X and S. Until now, Xbox owners have relied on the aging Xbox 360 version, which, via backcompat enhancements on Series X, has since been boosted to 4K resolution with better texture filtering. Sadly though, and gallingly, this version has remained stuck at just 30 frames per second for all these years. It also relies on the legacy anti-aliasing option of the 360 code, 2x MSAA, which while impressive for its day, lacks the coverage for all those foliage elements. The new 2025 release for Series X then gives the game a complete and much needed refresh. All of the PS5 visual upgrades apply here. We get a native 4K image, much improved anti-aliasing, plus those CHSS shadows of course. We get the works, but the most standout upgrade of course is the boost to 60 FPS today. It's a rock solid 60 as you'd expect, and easily the most transformative part of the jump. Moving on, Series S users reap the spoils in a similar way. Fundamentally, most settings are identical to Series X, with the exception of resolution, which settles for 1440p here instead. This again matches what we had before on Series S playing the 360 version, where its res boosted to 1440p via backcompat enhancements. So really, the improved anti-aliasing accounts for the image quality gains you see here, while we also get the same LOD improvements to Series X. The cherry on the cake is that it also runs at a perfect 60 FPS, including those Undead Nightmare zombie pileups. Rounding out, we have Rockstar's mobile release, which my good friend and colleague Oliver Mackenzie kindly checked out on his own iPhone 15 Pro. Now, a 30 FPS fidelity and 40 FPS performance mode is included on iPhones 15, 16 and 17, while the iPad M3 and M4 allow that performance mode to reach 60 FPS. So it is a tad disappointing to not see this 60 FPS option even on those more powerful recent iPhones, but it is what it is. Looking at each mode in turn, the iPhone 15 Pro is capably hitting 30 FPS in that fidelity mode. Using the Metal HUD overlay, every frame fits within a 33.3 millisecond render budget quite easily. In terms of pixel counts, this mode also renders at 2304 by 1062, scaled up to the iPhone's 2556 by 1179 display. We've notched up the res scale to maximum in the settings, and there's zero issue holding at 30 FPS here as a result. It runs in a slick ultra-wide aspect ratio that looks great on the iPhone 15's display, and the only snag is that it appears to be using just FXAA as the anti-aliasing method. Flicker is present as a result, especially in motion, where a more advanced temporal solution would have made a big difference. Also frustratingly, there's obvious pop-in for terrain and foliage, which isn't such a factor on even the Switch 2 release. The performance mode, meanwhile, makes that jump to 40 FPS, and deploying the Metal HUD again, there's no issue hitting that. Resolution-wise, it's around 1521 by 702 in performance mode, which, scaled up, produces much rougher returns as you'd expect. Overall, given the lack of visual settings options or ways to scale the resolution higher, or even get to 60 FPS, it's a somewhat disappointing turnout, and especially so if you have more recent iPhone models. The original Red Dead Redemption makes a grand return, where the impact of this upgrade depends on your platform of choice. Arguably, the least impactful boost is on PS5, since it already enjoyed a decent enough rendition via the PS4 app, though the draw distance, shadow and anti-aliasing improvements are welcome. Meanwhile, the Xbox Series X and S versions are the major beneficiaries of this 2025 version. 60 FPS makes such a big difference for these machines, and it's like a breath of fresh air to finally have it on Xbox. All of which is to say, there's never been a better time to play the game, and never more platforms to play it on, and hopefully, perhaps, this shows a trend in Rockstar's investment in Switch 2, leading to the sequel getting the same treatment at some point. But that's all from me today. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. Check out our Patreon to support what we do at Digital Foundry, and of course to get in touch with myself or the team, you know where to find us. But for now, thanks for watching.